Hi y'all, Dave here. Thank you for joining me for yet another video. In this one, I'm going to take a look at claims like atheism requires faith. This is a claim that seems to come and go when it comes to theists, especially Christians. And this seems to be one of those times where it is in a phase of being used, as I've seen it pop up several times recently. A famous example of this argument comes in the form of Frank Turek's book, I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. Turek also gives many seminars and talks on the subject as well. And while this video will be looking at the claim itself, it won't particularly be going into any detail about Turek's book or argument. This video will focus solely on theists making this claim, because no skeptic or atheist would make such a ridiculous claim, would they? Well, I wouldn't be so sure about that. In recent times, there has been a push from within certain parts of the atheist community to redefine the terms antitheism and antitheist. In previous times, the term antitheism was used to define opposition to religion and belief in God, and antitheist was defined as a person who held to antitheism. In recent times, though, there has been a push to redefine antitheism as the belief God does not exist, and an antitheist as a person that believes God does not exist. Those that are pushing for this redefinition of antitheism and antitheist also, oddly, seem to be adopting arguments like Frank Turek's, with them claiming that this form of antitheism is an irrational position that takes faith. Bit of an odd stance and an odd turn of events, and one that I will be looking at here, along with the claim that atheism takes faith, and why that claim does not hold true against any definition of atheism. Let's begin first with a look at what is meant by faith. Just like any other word, the term faith is a term that has multiple meanings, and the meaning the term has depends on the context in which it is used. In a moment, we'll have a look at how it is defined in a couple of dictionaries and how it is defined in the Bible according to the site Christianity.com. Let's first begin with the definition found in the Collins Online Dictionary, and that should be appearing on screen right about now. Looking at the definitions given, we can see that they can be broken up into a few categories. The categories could be considered trust, belief, religion, and finally loyalty. Now, let's have a look at the definition found in the Merriam-Webster Online Dictionary. This one is broken up into two parts, with the first one appearing on screen right about now. As we can see, the entry found in the Merriam-Webster Online Dictionary roughly resembles the Collins one when it comes to the definitions, and they can be broken up into roughly the same categories. What about the second part of the Merriam-Webster definition that I mentioned? Well, that's a pretty short one, and that should be appearing on screen right about now. As we can see, that one is pretty short, and it deals only with belief and trust. We'll save the Christianity.com definition until later. So, which of these definitions would actually apply to the claim atheism takes faith? Let's get the Collins one back up on screen for now. Okay, with that one back up on screen, let's take a closer look at the definitions that are given. There are a bunch of them that we can immediately and obviously discount. After all, atheism cannot be a specific set of religious beliefs, or trust in God and his actions and promises, and it cannot be conviction in the truth of certain doctrines of religion. Atheism is not the belief that God exists, nor is it a specific set of religious beliefs or doctrines. So, let's get rid of them. Okay, there we go. They're gone. It also cannot be allegiance or loyalty as to a person or cause, as this doesn't really fit in with our belief attitudes toward the claim God exists. So, let's get rid of that one too. There we are. Gone. So now we have got rid of the definitions that absolutely could not apply to atheism or being an atheist. What we are left with are three definitions that may apply to atheism and atheists. There are strong or unshakable belief in something, especially without proof or evidence. Complete confidence or trust in a person, remedy, etc. any set of firmly held principles or beliefs. Let's have a look at the Merriam-Webster Online Dictionary entry for faith again. That should be appearing on screen right about now. As we can immediately see, just as with the Collins entry, there are some definitions in there that can immediately go, and for the same reasons that we got rid of them in the Collins entry. So let's get rid of all those that don't apply to atheism or atheists. And they're gone. So, just as with the Collins entry, we are left with only a couple of definitions that could possibly apply to atheism and atheists. These are firm belief in something for which there is no proof, something that is believed, especially with strong conviction. There was a part 2 to the definition from Merriam-Webster, but it is classed as archaic, meaning that this definition no longer applies to the current usage, so we can just discount that one as well. Finally, we are left with the definition of faith from the site Christianity.com, which should be on screen right about now. There we go. So this one defines faith as the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. If we take the definition strictly as it is written, and without the connotation of it being directly related to belief in God, then we can get rid of the assurance of things hoped for, as no definition of atheism or atheist relates to things hoped for. The second half of the definition, the conviction of things not seen, taken prima facie, could apply, I guess. It could be interpreted along the same lines of the strong or unshakable belief in something, especially without proof or evidence definition from the Collins Online entry. This means part of the definition can basically be subsumed by the other definitions. What we are left with then are the following definitions: strong or unshakable belief in something, especially without proof or evidence. Complete confidence or trust in a person, remedy, etc. Any set of firmly held principles or beliefs. Firm belief in something for which there is no proof. Something that is believed, especially with strong conviction. Some of these definitions basically refer to the same thing, but use slightly different wording. So before carrying on, let's reduce the definitions down as far as possible. And in doing so, we are left with only a couple. Firm conviction or unshakable belief in something, especially without proof or evidence, and any set of firmly held principles or beliefs. These two definitions seem to cover everything that the other definitions hint at, though in a more general way in the case of the first definition. We can now assess the definitions of atheism using these two definitions of faith and see whether atheism actually fits the bill of needing faith. Alright, so here's where we start treading dangerous ground, as we are looking at the definitions of atheism. If there's one surefire way to rile up many atheists on social media and cause arguments and blocks, it's discussing the definition of the term atheism or atheist. As I type this very script, there is an argument happening right now on Twitter about the definition of atheism. However, I'm not arguing for any particular definition here or saying that there is only one definition that is correct, nothing like that. I'm simply showing the two most common definitions of atheism so that we can assess the definitions of faith against them. Let's begin by looking at a few definitions of atheism in various dictionaries. Up first, we have the definition listed in dictionary.com, and that should be on screen right about now. As can be seen, it lists two definitions for the term atheism. The first is the doctrine or belief there is no God, and the second is disbelief in the existence of a supreme being or beings. Next up is the definition as listed in the online Collins dictionary, which should be on screen right about now. As can be seen, it is here described as the belief that there is no God. Let's bring up the entry in the Cambridge Online Dictionary, with that appearing right about now. As we can see, the Cambridge Dictionary describes atheism as the fact of not believing in God or gods, and the belief that no God or gods exist. After looking at those 3 entries from various online dictionaries, we can see that there are 2 common ideas put forward. One is that atheism is not believing in a god or gods, and the other is that atheism is believing there is no god or gods. The first idea also covers and includes a lack of belief in God or gods, as many atheists like to define the term. When traversing the atheist community, you will also come across many idiosyncratic definitions of both atheism and atheist. But for the purpose of this video, these are irrelevant. I can already hear the furious typing of many atheists taking to the comment section to tell me all about how I don't know what atheism is, how I don't know anything about atheism, and that it is not the belief that God does not exist, and how the dictionaries I've used here are wrong. All I really have to say to that is I really don't care about your complaints or your arguments with regards to the definition of atheism and atheist. Take them to somewhere else and take them to someone who cares. If you want to know why I don't care about those arguments or your opinion, go check out my video titled Atheism, A Tale of Two Usages to find out why your arguments are more than likely wrong. Okay, so regularly scheduled programming can now resume, and the video will continue on using atheism to mean both a lack of belief in God or gods and the belief that God does not exist. If that angers you, then I suggest returning to the YouTube homepage and finding a video less likely to raise your blood pressure. So, on with the video. Next up, let's have a look at how these definitions of atheism can be compared to the definitions of faith that we're left with in the previous section. As stated, we'll be checking the claim atheism takes faith with the 2 definitions of atheism mentioned in the previous section against the definitions of faith we were left with earlier in the video. So let's start with atheism defined as a lack of belief in God or gods. Using this definition, we can restate atheism requires faith as it takes faith to lack a belief in God or gods for the sake of clarity. So, does it take faith to lack a belief in gods? Well, let's have a look at the first definition of faith that we were left with earlier in the video. If we recall, the first definition is that faith is something like firm conviction or unshakable belief in something, especially without proof or evidence. Immediately, something jumps out at us here. This definition of atheism is describing a lack of belief in something, not a belief in something. So, this definition of faith really cannot apply to this form of atheism. Sure, some of those that lack a belief in gods might be unshakable in that lack of belief, but this definition of faith still wouldn't apply. What about the second definition of faith, though? The second definition is any set of firmly held principles or beliefs. What's generally being referred to here is the firmly held principle or beliefs of some kind of dogma or religion. However, let's just take that to mean any set of firmly held principles or beliefs in order to give it the strongest reading. So the question here would be, is a lack of belief in gods a set of firmly held principles or beliefs? No, it isn't. It is describing the absence of a particular psychological or mental state in an individual. So of course, atheism in this sense cannot be faith in this sense. This seems like a pretty simple answer, doesn't it? Well, I'm not so sure that atheists that adopt this form of atheism get off quite so easily. Of course, atheism in this sense doesn't fit the bill. That much is obvious. It also doesn't necessarily take faith to be an atheist in this sense, as the term simply describes a person lacking a particular psychological or mental state. However, there may be many attitudes and ideas that the individual atheist holds that may fit these definitions of faith. Many atheists that hold to the lack of belief in God's definition hold to certain claims about gods and religious belief with firm conviction and unshakable belief. Many also hold to a set of firmly held principles or beliefs about God and religious belief. Though it would be slightly disingenuous to conflate those holding firm conviction or unshakable belief about gods and religious belief with that form of atheism requiring faith. It would also be disingenuous to conflate their set of firmly held principles or beliefs about God and religions with that form of atheism requiring faith. The most obvious reason why it would be disingenuous is because it ignores the fact that this form of atheism is simply descriptive. Another reason is that they did not get their firm conviction, unshakable belief, or their set of firmly held principles from atheism in this sense. Instead, they got it from the communities they exist in. So while some of their attitudes might be able to be described as faith in this sense, it still doesn't lead to the claim atheism requires faith being true. That's one definition of atheism down, one more to go. Next up is the definition belief God does not exist. We can reduce this one to it requires faith to believe that God does not exist for a little bit of clarity. And this definition feels more likely to fit the bill of at least one of the definitions of faith. Let's go with the first definition of faith that we got earlier in the video. Firm conviction or unshakable belief in something, especially without proof or evidence. This form of atheism is describing a belief rather than a lack of belief. So yeah, this one definitely feels like it fits the bill of faith. Or does it? Well, there is nothing within that definition that states that you must hold it with firm conviction or unshakable belief. Most atheists I know that hold to this definition do not do so with unshakable belief, though many do so with firm conviction. But firm conviction seems to simply be a property of any belief that we are confident about. I guess what matters here is that the firm conviction is held without proof or evidence. So do those atheists that hold to this definition of atheism do so without proof or evidence? When asked for justifications for why they believe God does not exist, most atheists that hold to this definition will be able to provide proof and evidence for their position. Whether that proof or evidence is convincing to those asking for it is a different matter, but that's true of any position. However, if the theist here wants to say that these proofs and evidence do not count as proofs or evidence, then they are by that very same statements declaring that their proofs and evidence do not count as proofs and evidence, thereby admitting that they hold the belief that God exists without proof or evidence, and thereby supporting the claim from many atheists that there is no evidence for the existence of God. Any theist that wants to argue that this definition of faith fits all those that believe that God does not exist certainly does walk a tightrope, and a tightrope that they are bound to slip from. Finally, we're left with the definition of faith as any set of firmly held principles or beliefs. Well, the belief that God does not exist certainly is a belief. Could it be considered a set of beliefs, though? You could make an argument that a set can contain a single item, and therefore the belief that God does not exist is a set of beliefs containing a single belief. So, as long as that single item set is firmly held by the atheist, then we have found a version of atheism that seems to resemble faith. But there are a couple of problems with this one. It still doesn't lead to atheism requires faith, as there is nothing in that version of atheism that requires the atheist to hold the belief with firm conviction. The atheist could hold to it with very little conviction. It's just that they are slightly more convinced that God does not exist than that God exists. So their particular atheism would not require faith. Another problem here is that they are having to bend the definition of faith in order to fit this form of atheism into it. One would have to argue that a single belief constitutes a set, and so long as that single belief is held with a firm conviction, then so is the set of beliefs, meaning that atheism in this sense is faith. But that waters down the term to such that it becomes meaningless. If someone firmly holds the belief that it is good to give to charity, then that too becomes faith. What about firmly holding the belief that Aliens is a better film than Alien? Well, that too constitutes faith. Or what about firmly holding the belief that you regularly keep your keys in a dish on the counter in your kitchen? Yep. That too counts as faith. So, as we can see, if a theist wants to make the effort to define atheism in the sense of belief God does not exist as a faith, then they essentially reduce all firmly held beliefs to faith. even ones that we would not normally refer to as faith, or even having faith that it is true. However, if the theist wants to use the term faith to describe atheism in either sense, then they are reducing the term faith to something meaningless, or it undermines the claim like Christian faith is based on reason and evidence. The theist must either bite that bullet or relinquish the claim that atheism requires faith. This means that atheism in neither sense requires faith or is a form of faith. None of the definitions of faith, especially those in the religious sense, fit the bill for it to require faith or be a form of faith, unless the theist wants to reduce it to something that is meaningless. There is a problem with my argument too, though. My argument rests on the idea that the theist is being honest when they argue that atheism requires faith, or is a form of faith, something I'm not entirely sure they are being when making this argument. Instead, I would argue that rather than being based in honesty and good faith, this argument is based on manipulation. Why do I say this? Well, there are certain words that many in the atheist community do their best to disassociate from. Words like belief and faith are among them. For many, the words faith and belief are directly connected to both religion and irrationality. To be accused of holding something on faith is to be accused of being irrational. The same goes for the word belief. To hold the belief is to hold an irrational position on something. Many atheists care little about whether something is taken on faith or whether to hold the belief is to hold an irrational position. All that matters is whether or not one is accused of or could possibly appear to be irrational. For many, it is the aesthetic of the position that counts. To be painted as having a position based on faith is to be painted as being irrational. It is a common problem in the atheist community. As much effort as possible is made to sever all things atheism and atheist from any connection to religion or religious belief. That goes for everything from the definition of atheism to the use of words like belief and faith. There is a desire for many atheists to appear as rational as possible. Whether one is rational counts less than whether one appears to be rational. One example of such is the unwillingness of some atheists to make the claim that Santa Claus does not exist, instead claiming only to lack a belief in Santa Claus. This is what arguments like atheism requires faith and it takes faith to be an atheist prey on. It preys on the fear that many atheists have of appearing to be irrational, or appearing in any way to hold any position that might even resemble a religious position in any way whatsoever. So the accusation that it takes faith to believe God does not exist is enough to cause many atheists to look at the belief God does not exist as being irrational. There are other factors that are involved too, but this is something that plays a part, and what arguments like this rely on. Like I mentioned in the introduction to the video, there is currently a push going on to redefine the terms antitheism and antitheist. The term antitheism originally referred to the position of being opposed to belief in God or gods, and being opposed to religion, with the term antitheist referring to a person that adopted the stance of antitheism. So the antitheist was a person that was opposed to belief in God or gods, and took an active stance against both belief in gods and religion. Even today, there are still many that refer to it that way, and almost all dictionaries refer to it as such. For example, this is the entry for antitheism in the Collins Online Dictionary, which should be appearing right about now. And what shows up when you do a Google search for the definition of antitheism should be appearing on screen right about now. And this is the entry in the free dictionary online dictionary that's appearing on screen right about now. And just for good measure, here is what Wikipedia has to say about antitheism. It is in this way that Christopher Hitchens used the term also. Hitchens believed that religion was an untruth, as can be seen in the image that should have appeared on screen by now. An untruth is a lie or false statement, so Hitchens' atheism did not refer to a lack of belief in gods, as it does for many in the atheist community. Hitchens believed that the claim God exists is false. Rather than simply not believing God exists, he positively believed that God does not exist. He also considered that separate to his antitheism, as can be seen in the image. Hitchens referred to himself as an antitheist because he positively opposed belief in God, not because he believed God does not exist. He used the term atheism to refer to his belief that God does not exist. From these definitions and looking at the way Hitchens used the term atheist, we can see that the common usage of antitheism is, and was, the opposition to belief in gods. We can also see that antitheist referred to a person that was opposed to belief in gods and religion. Yet, like I say, there is a push going on to redefine antitheism as the belief God does not exist, with antitheist referring to a person that believes God does not exist. In other words, they have removed the belief God does not exist definition out of the term atheism and moved that definition into antitheism. For evidence that this push to redefine the term antitheism is happening, we need only look at the Canadian Atheists webpage run by Randolf Richardson, which should be appearing on screen right about now. This redefinition is also used by people like Matt Dillahunty, as mentioned by Randolf Richardson in the tweet appearing on screen now. I have also heard the term used in this way by people like Eric and V of Skeptic Generation and some others. This redefinition of the terms has also made it to a wider audience. What you can see on screen now is a tweet from a conversation I was having last year when discussing the fact that the word atheism has multiple definitions. And what's appearing on screen is one more tweet of this redefinition of antitheism being used out in the wild on social media. So, as we can see, there is a push to redefine the belief God does not exist as antitheism, and one that's being kind of successful. But why is this important or even interesting? In order to understand why it is important, we need to first consider the argument atheism requires faith a little more. Recalling back to the section on defining atheism, we saw that there are two common definitions of atheism as listed in dictionaries. One is the definition used by those that are redefining antitheism, and that definition is a lack of belief in gods. The other definition is the belief God does not exist, and it is this latter definition that the claims like atheism requires faith and I don't have enough faith to be an atheist are attacking, rather than the former. By redefining that version of atheism as antitheism, those doing the redefining are attempting to deflect accusations of faith and irrationality away from the word atheism. It also means that they are agreeing with the apologists making these kind of arguments. Those redefining the word are agreeing that prior to the advent of people like Matt Dillahunty, Aaron Ra, and Randolf Richardson, atheism was an irrational position to take. As prior to the popularity of the lack of belief in God's definition, most people classed as atheists were people that believed God did not exist. In Europe, many people still do consider atheism to be the belief that God does not exist, and consider themselves atheist in that sense. So, by redefining the term antitheism to mean the belief God does not exist, and then relabeling a lot of atheists as anti-theists, people like Matt and Randolph are holding those atheists up like lambs to be sacrificed on the altar of apologetics. They are agreeing to and adopting the language of the worst of apologists, and then using that to attack other atheists. By doing so, they are agreeing that anyone that believes God does not exist, and argues against the existence of God, is irrational and holds a faith-based position, rather than attacking the idea that to believe that God does not exist is a faith-based position. An argument that's not even particularly hard to dispel, as we saw earlier in the video. Now, it seems easy to understand why somebody like Frank Turek would want to paint a picture of those that believe God does not exist as irrational. An apologist wants to make his particular in-group feel superior, and they want to make sure that they do not leave the flock, so to speak. By painting a picture of those that believe God does not exist as irrational, apologists play to their followers' desire to feel superior, and it limits their desire to leave the flock. Apologists also have a desire to ensure that arguments aimed at convincing people that God does not exist are seen as irrational. For if the flock become convinced that God does not exist, then they lose a follower, and some will also have a genuine fear that they are losing a member of the flock to eternal damnation. Essentially, those kind of apologists have ideological reasons to limit the power of arguments that God does not exist. But what reasons would those calling themselves atheists have for wanting to limit the power of arguments that God does not exist? What reason would those calling themselves atheists have to protect theists from arguments that God does not exist? What reason would those calling themselves atheists have to paint those that believe and argue that God does not exist as irrational? Even more importantly, what reason would those calling themselves atheists have for adopting and promoting the arguments of apologists? And most importantly, why would people like Randolf and Matt teach people to agree with and adopt the arguments of apologists, rather than teaching them to argue against those arguments from those same apologists? I have my suspicions about why people like Randolf, Richardson, and Matt Dillahunty are so happy to throw other atheists under the bus, as well as my suspicions for why they are so happy to adopt the apologetics and tactics of theists. This video is already long enough as it is though, so I will cover those thoughts in a future video. For now though, I would suggest that anyone eager to adopt this redefinition of anti-theism and this redefinition of anti-theist to think about why this redefinition is happening, and think about why people like Randolph and Matt are promoting religious apologetics in the name of atheism, and why they are using those religious apologetics to convince you to throw other atheists onto the altar of religious apologists. This video has already packed enough into it, and it's already run much longer than I originally intended it to. It has also probably raised the heckles of many atheists, but hopefully those whose heckles have been raised will also spend some time thinking about what has been said. As was shown earlier in the video, it's not hard to dispute arguments like atheism requires faith, it takes faith to be an atheist, and that kind of thing. This goes not only for the lack of belief in God style atheism, but also for the belief God does not exist style atheism. So rather than simply redefining the terms antitheism and antitheist and sacrificing other atheists on the altar of religious apologists, it would be better to meet those arguments head on. We also saw that the terms antitheism and antitheist are being redefined, and that by doing so, many atheists, including atheists like Matt Dillahunty and Randolf Richardson, are accepting and using the arguments of religious apologists, something that should give any atheist pause for thought, whichever definition they use. Whenever we see other atheists like Matt Dillahunty and Randolf Richardson using these arguments, we should ask them why they are so happy and eager to promote religious apologetics in the name of atheism. Ask them why they are so happy to sacrifice other atheists to religious apologists, rather than put forward what is a very simple argument in order to defend both types of atheism. I'll end the video on this note. As stated, in the near future, I will give my thoughts on why I think they are so happy to adopt these apologetics in the name of atheism, as well as why I think they are so happy and eager to sacrifice some atheists to the religious apologist. See you in my next video, hopefully. Thanks for listening to me rant. Take care, all.